Why would anyone stop wanting to visit New York, the city that once defined ambition, freedom, and possibility? That question alone makes people uncomfortable because it challenges something deeper than tourism. It challenges the idea that New York is still working the way we were told it does. In the movies, it is electric, unstoppable, rewarding. In reality, for many visitors, the disappointment begins before the plane even lands. Something feels off. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just quietly wrong. New York was never supposed to be easy, but it was supposed to feel worth it. Today, that balance has collapsed. What used to be excitement has turned into calculation. Every decision becomes a cost-benefit analysis. Every step feels monetized. Every moment comes with a price tag that was never clearly advertised. And the shock is not just how expensive the city is, but how aggressively it charges you for simply existing inside it. This is not about luxury travel or elite experiences. This is about ordinary people arriving with ordinary expectations and discovering that the city now treats them less like guests and more like revenue streams. From the moment you arrive, the message is subtle but constant. Pay more, accept less, and do not complain. The illusion survives only because the charges are fragmented, disguised as fees, surcharges, mandatory tips, penalties, and normal costs that no one warned you about. What makes this more disturbing is that none of
these charges exist in isolation. Individually, they look minor. Together, they form a system designed not to welcome, but to extract, not to impress, but to endure. And the visitor feels it instinctively. A tension in the air, a sense that enjoyment must be earned through stress, that relaxation is a luxury New York no longer offers easily. The city still sells the same image, but it delivers a very different experience. You arrive expecting energy and leave managing frustration. You
expect movement and encounter friction. You expect world-class infrastructure and instead face delays, confusion, and fatigue. And slowly, without realizing it, the trip becomes less about discovery and more about damage control. This is why more travelers are quietly saying the same thing after returning home. Not loudly, not in headlines, just privately, honestly. They would not do it again. Not because New York lacks culture or history, but because the cost of accessing it has become absurd, in ways that feel almost hostile. The city does not collapse in a single moment. It erodes trust through 1,000 small charges that drain enthusiasm one receipt at a time. And that raises a more uncomfortable question. If visiting New York now feels like navigating a system designed to punish the average person, what does that say about the city itself? Because tourism is not separate from urban life. It reflects it. And what visitors experience in days, residents endure for years. The charges you are about to see are not random. They are symptoms, signals of a deeper structural shift that most people sense, but few are willing to name yet. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, pause for a second and think about why. This video is not here to entertain you with complaints or exaggerations. It is here to help you understand a pattern that most people feel but rarely analyze. When you understand what is really happening to cities like New York, you start seeing the same signals everywhere else. And that awareness matters because it changes how you make decisions, how you travel, and how you evaluate the promises sold by modern urban life. If you have ever visited New York, planned a trip, or seriously considered going, your perspective matters here. Leave a comment sharing what surprised you the most, or simply write, "I felt this," if these first minutes already connected with your experience. Your comment helps this conversation exist beyond the screen. If this analysis is adding clarity instead of noise, take a second to like the video. That small action tells the platform that this kind of deep, honest discussion is worth showing to more people who feel the same unease but cannot yet explain it. And if you want more content that questions urban myths instead of glorifying them, consider subscribing. This channel exists for people who want reality, not marketing. The real collapse of a New York trip does not happen when you arrive. It starts earlier, quietly, during planning. What used to feel like anticipation now feels like anxiety. You open tabs, compare prices, read fine print, and realize that nothing about this trip feels simple anymore. Flights are expensive, but that is expected. What is not expected is how every single detail begins to feel like a trap waiting to close. Hotels advertise one price and charge another. Resort fees appear in a city with no resorts. Taxes stack on top of taxes. Mandatory tips are added before you even experience the service. Suddenly, the budget you carefully planned is already broken, and you have not even packed your bags. The stress begins before the journey, and that alone changes the psychology of the trip. This is where the illusion starts cracking. Travel is supposed to feel like escape. New York now feels like preparation for impact. Every click forces a decision. Do you downgrade comfort to survive costs, or do you accept overpaying to avoid inconvenience? Either way, you lose something before you arrive. The city takes from you in advance. And the most unsettling part is how normalized this has become. Nothing feels illegal. Nothing feels shocking on paper. It is all framed as standard procedure, industry practice, urban reality. But when you add it all together, the experience feels predatory, not aggressive, not obvious, just relentless. The kind of pressure that drains excitement slowly until you are no longer dreaming about the trip, only managing it. This shift matters because it reveals how New York now relates to people. Not as visitors to be welcomed, but as variables to be optimized. The city does not ask what kind of experience you want. It asks how much you can tolerate. And that question follows you everywhere once you arrive. Airports are the first physical confirmation. Long lines, confusing signage, overcrowded terminals, and outdated systems greet you after hours of travel. You are tired, disoriented, and already on edge. The city's introduction is not energy or inspiration, but friction. It signals that efficiency is no longer a promise, just a slogan. Then comes transportation. Getting from the airport to where you are staying feels like a negotiation. Prices fluctuate, rules change, options feel unreliable. You are constantly checking your phone, recalculating, second-guessing. The city demands attention instead of offering flow, and the mental cost of that never appears on a receipt. At this point, something subtle happens. You stop asking, "What do I want to do?" and start asking, "What can I afford to do without regret?" That single shift changes the entire trip. Spontaneity dies. Curiosity narrows. You are no longer exploring New York. You are defending yourself from it. This is not about being cheap or unprepared. Even well-financed visitors report the same feeling. The issue is not absolute cost. It is the feeling of being constantly squeezed, constantly monitored, constantly charged. The city does not trust you to enjoy it freely. It conditions you to move carefully, spend strategically, and accept disappointment as part of the package. And this is only the beginning. Because once you step into the city itself, the charges stop being abstract and start following your every move, turning ordinary actions into financial decisions with consequences. Once you are inside New York, the illusion finally breaks. Not in one dramatic moment, but through repetition. You start noticing how every basic action comes with an unexpected charge attached to it. Not luxury choices, not optional upgrades, ordinary movements, ordinary needs. Things that, in most cities, you barely think about. You walk a few blocks and realize that even sitting down costs money. Public spaces are scarce, crowded, or quietly hostile. Bathrooms are locked, restricted, or tied to a purchase. Want to rest for a moment? Buy something? Want to wait without being rushed? Pay. The city subtly reminds you that lingering without spending is not welcome behavior. Then the small fees begin to stack. Transportation charges fluctuate without clear logic. One route costs double another for no visible reason. Luggage fees appear unexpectedly. Convenience surcharges are added for doing things the normal way. Cashless systems force tips upward. Digital screens suggest amounts that feel more like pressure than gratitude. You are not choosing generosity. You are navigating obligation. What makes these charges absurd is not their individual size, but their frequency. They follow you constantly. Entry fees, service fees, facility fees, processing fees, fees for speed, fees for delay, fees for rules you did not know existed 5 minutes ago. Each one feels small enough to tolerate, but together they create a background noise of financial stress that never turns off. This is where the psychology shifts again. You stop trusting prices. You start scanning for hidden costs. You read menus defensively. You hesitate before opening doors. The city trains you to expect extraction, and once that expectation settles in, enjoyment becomes fragile. Every moment carries the risk of another surprise charge that breaks immersion. Food is where this becomes impossible to ignore. New York markets itself as a culinary capital, but the experience is often transactional rather than welcoming. Portions shrink. Prices rise. Mandatory tips inflate totals beyond what feels reasonable. Additional charges appear at checkout, with vague labels. The pleasure of eating becomes secondary to calculating whether the experience justified the cost. And it is not just restaurants. Museums charge extra for suggested donations that do not feel optional. Attractions advertise one price and deliver another at the door. Even walking tours come with add-ons framed as necessary to fully participate. The city constantly reframes spending as access and access as privilege. At this point, many visitors feel something they did not expect. Resentment. Not toward the city itself, but toward the system surrounding it. A sense that the city is no longer confident enough to rely on its value alone. It must monetize everything aggressively, just to sustain itself. This is where New York begins to feel less like a destination and more like a machine. A machine that does not care whether you enjoy the process, only that you keep moving and keep paying. The charges stop being about revenue and start signaling something deeper. Structural pressure, maintenance costs, systems stretched too thin and compensated by pushing the burden onto individuals. And once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. Because the absurd charges are not random inconveniences, they are symptoms. Indicators that the city's internal balance is breaking down, forcing it to extract more from everyone who passes through. But the financial pressure is only one layer, because beyond the money, there is another cost that visitors feel, just as strongly, even if they struggle to name it at first. By the time most visitors reach the middle of their trip, something heavier than financial fatigue sets in. It is psychological. New York does not just charge your wallet, it charges your nervous system. The city operates at a frequency that never drops, and for someone who is not conditioned to it, that constant intensity becomes exhausting fast. There is no true pause. Noise bleeds into every moment. Sirens, construction, horns, crowds moving with urgency that feels personal even when it is not. You are always navigating around someone, something, or some invisible rule. Even standing still feels wrong, like you are in the way. The city communicates urgency without saying a word, and your body absorbs it. This is where the idea of vacation collapses completely. You realize you are not recovering here. You are adapting. Sleep feels shallow. Mornings start with tension instead of curiosity. You wake up already alert, already preparing to defend your time, your space, your money. The city does not allow mental rest, only survival mode. What surprises many visitors is how normalized this pressure is. Locals move through it as if it were weather. Service workers appear rushed, guarded, emotionally distant, not out of rudeness but exhaustion. Everyone seems to be managing something just below the surface. Stress is not an exception in New York. It is the baseline. This constant strain reshapes the experience of the city. Attractions lose their magic faster. Streets feel less cinematic and more hostile. Crowds feel less exciting and more overwhelming. You start timing everything, avoiding certain areas, skipping plans you were once excited about simply because the effort feels too high. And this is not accidental. High density, high cost, and constant surveillance combine into a form of psychological taxation. You are watched, hurried, priced, and corrected continuously. Signs tell you what not to do. Announcements warn you of penalties. Cameras remind you to behave. The city feels less like a shared space and more like a controlled environment that tolerates you temporarily. The most unsettling part is how quickly visitors internalize this. You stop questioning it. You adapt. You move faster. You speak less. You plan routes to minimize exposure. In a strange way, you begin to act like a resident without any of the benefits of belonging. You carry the stress without the familiarity. This is where disappointment turns into disillusionment. The myth promised intensity as inspiration. Reality delivers intensity as pressure, and the difference matters. One energizes, the other drains. Many people leave New York not tired from adventure, but worn down from vigilance. This is why so many travelers describe the same feeling afterward. They saw incredible things. They took photos. They checked the boxes. But something felt wrong. The city never let them relax into it. It demanded constant engagement, constant spending, constant awareness. And when a city makes relaxation feel like a privilege instead of a default, it reveals something fundamental about its condition. Because places that are truly functional do not exhaust people just for being present. And that brings us to the environment itself. Because the stress is not only social or psychological, it is reinforced by the physical state of the city, in ways visitors cannot ignore once they start looking closely. What makes the pressure in New York feel so relentless is that it is reinforced by the city's physical condition. This is where the experience turns unsettling. You expect friction in a massive city, but what you encounter instead is a pattern of small failures that repeat so often they stop feeling temporary. Nothing fully breaks, yet nothing fully works either. The city operates in a permanent state of almost. Sidewalks are cracked, uneven, crowded with scaffolding that seems permanent rather than temporary. Streets are patched over and patched again, creating a sense that repairs are no longer solutions, just pauses. Elevators and subway stations are frequently out of service. Escalators stall without explanation. Signs promise efficiency while delivering confusion. These are not dramatic collapses. They are micro failures, and they are everywhere. This matters because micro failures change how people move. You walk more carefully. You plan extra time. You lower expectations. A 10-minute delay becomes normal. A missed connection feels inevitable. And when these moments stack, the city stops feeling dynamic and starts feeling fragile. Not broken enough to shock, but degraded enough to drain confidence. Visitors feel this immediately because they do not have the muscle memory locals rely on. When systems fail, there is no intuition to fall back on. A closed entrance forces a detour through unfamiliar streets. A delayed train disrupts a tightly planned day. A malfunctioning payment system creates stress where none should exist. The city demands constant adjustment, and adjustment is exhausting. Airports amplify this sensation. For a city that presents itself as a global hub, the experience is often chaotic. Congested terminals, outdated layouts, inconsistent signage, and overcrowded security lines greet travelers at both ends of their journey. The first and last impressions are not efficiency or grandeur, but fatigue. The city feels tired before you even step into it. Public transportation, once a symbol of New York's functionality, now mirrors its strain. Trains run, but unpredictably. Platforms fill beyond comfort. Announcements are vague. Delays are frequent enough to feel routine. You are always waiting for something that should have already happened. And that waiting becomes part of the cost of being there. This constant state of friction sends a subtle message. The city is stretched. Its systems are aging faster than they are being renewed. Maintenance replaces progress. Band-aids replace solutions. And instead of acknowledging this openly, the burden is quietly shifted onto individuals who are expected to adapt without complaint. Over time, this erodes trust. You stop believing schedules. You stop relying on promises. You stop assuming things will work as intended. The city teaches you to expect inconvenience, and that expectation reshapes behavior. Visitors become cautious. Residents become resigned. Everyone adjusts downward. This is the silent nature of urban decline, not collapse, but normalization. When enough small failures become routine, people stop noticing how much energy it takes just to move through the day. The city does not fall apart. It wears people down. And when a place demands constant effort simply to function within it, enjoyment becomes conditional. You can still have good moments, but they come at a higher psychological cost. You earn them rather than receive them. This is why the experience feels heavier than the price tags alone can explain. The charges you pay with money are matched by charges you pay with patience, attention, and emotional resilience. And once that balance tips, the city stops feeling like a destination and starts feeling like a test. Because beneath the surface of these micro-failures lies a deeper transformation, one that becomes impossible to ignore when you see how the city now treats those who come not to live there, but simply to visit. The longer you stay, the clearer. It becomes that infrastructure in New York is no longer designed to support experience. It is designed to endure strain. Airports, stations, streets, and buildings do not invite movement. They resist it. And resistance changes how a city feels. You sense it in bottlenecks that appear without warning, in corridors that funnel crowds into tension, in systems that work only if everyone behaves perfectly at the same time. Airports are the most honest mirror of this reality. They are supposed to be gateways, moments of arrival and departure that set the tone. Instead, they feel like pressure chambers. Security lines spill into hallways. Boarding areas lack seating. Announcements overlap and contradict. You are processed, not welcomed. Time stretches unpredictably, and uncertainty becomes the dominant emotion. The city greets you with friction, not clarity. Inside the city, the pattern continues. Subway stations feel narrow for the volume they carry. Platforms vibrate with urgency. Trains arrive late, then all at once, then not at all. Information screens freeze. Announcements apologize without explaining. You learn to expect disruption and to blame yourself for not anticipating it. The system conditions compliance through confusion. Streets tell the same story. Construction scaffolding blocks light and space for years at a time. Lanes narrow, then disappear. Pedestrians are pushed into traffic, cyclists into pedestrians, cars into standoffs. Movement becomes negotiation. Every commute, every walk, every transfer requires alertness. There is no passive flow, only constant correction. What makes this unsettling is the contrast between cost and outcome. You pay premium prices to enter a city that delivers a sub-premium baseline. You pay for speed and receive waiting. You pay for access and receive restriction. You pay for global status and receive local inconvenience. The gap between what is charged and what is delivered widens with each interaction. This is where visitors start asking a question they never expected to ask. Where is all the money going? Because nothing here feels underfunded, yet nothing feels maintained at the level those costs imply. The answer is not simple, but the effect is clear. The city extracts value faster than it reinvests it into functionality that people can feel. Infrastructure decay does not need visible ruin to be effective. It only needs enough friction to slow life down, enough unpredictability to create anxiety, enough inconvenience to make people plan defensively instead of living freely. New York has reached that threshold, not in one dramatic failure, but through accumulation. This changes how visitors behave. They avoid certain routes. They leave earlier than necessary. They skip plans that require too many transfers. They choose safety over curiosity, predictability over exploration. The city narrows itself through friction, and when a city narrows, its promise shrinks with it. What is most revealing is how little surprise this generates among residents. For them, this is normal. They build workarounds into their lives. They buffer time. They accept degradation as a fact of urban existence. The system survives because people absorb its failures personally. But visitors cannot absorb that weight for long. They feel it as stress, as fatigue, as disappointment that lacks a single cause. And that feeling accumulates quietly until it becomes a conclusion, not spoken loudly, not posted in headlines, simply decided. And once that decision is made, something deeper becomes visible. Because the infrastructure does not just shape movement, it shapes who the city is for. And increasingly, it signals that the city is no longer optimized for people who come temporarily, but for extraction from those who pass through. That shift becomes even clearer when you look at how tourism itself now functions inside the city. Tourism in New York no longer feels like an invitation. It feels like a mechanism. The city does not guide visitors toward discovery. It funnels them toward monetization. Every experience is packaged, tiered, and optimized to extract maximum value in minimal time. What once felt organic now feels engineered, and visitors sense it almost immediately. You see it in how movement is controlled. Popular areas are designed to keep you circulating through shops, ticket counters, and branded experiences rather than public space. Benches disappear. Quiet corners are removed. Free views are blocked or redirected behind barriers. Access is no longer assumed. It is sold back to you in fragments. Even cultural experiences reflect this shift. Museums rely heavily on suggested donations that feel mandatory. Special exhibits require extra tickets. Audio guides cost more. Lines are structured to separate those who pay for priority from those who wait. The experience subtly teaches you that patience is a penalty and speed is a purchase. Tours multiply, but authenticity shrinks. Walking tours overlap, repeat, and compete for the same sidewalks, turning neighborhoods into stages rather than living spaces. Guides rush scripts. Crowds follow flags. Locals navigate around clusters of visitors who are consuming the city rather than encountering it. Tourism becomes spectacle, not connection. This dynamic creates tension on both sides. Visitors feel like they are constantly being sold to. Residents feel like their daily life has been converted into a product. The city becomes a marketplace first and a community second. And when that balance tips, hospitality erodes. Restaurants in tourist zones reflect this clearly. Menus are inflated, portions are reduced. Service feels transactional. Turnover is prioritized over experience. You are encouraged to eat quickly, pay quickly, and leave quickly. Dining becomes throughput. The goal is not satisfaction, but volume. What makes this especially damaging is how unavoidable it feels. Even when you try to step away from obvious tourist traps, the pricing logic follows you. The same extraction model appears in transportation, entertainment, and basic convenience. The city has learned to monetize attention itself. This changes how visitors remember the trip, not as moments of discovery, but as a sequence of transactions. They remember waiting, paying, being rushed, being corrected, being charged. The emotional residue is not inspiration, but fatigue. Over time, this undermines the city's appeal. Tourism depends on desire, and desire depends on the belief that an experience will give more than it takes. When visitors feel that New York takes constantly and gives selectively, the equation breaks, and this is where the illusion finally starts failing at scale. Because tourism is not just about visitors, it is feedback. It reflects how a city treats people who are free to leave. And when those people quietly decide not to return, it signals something deeper than dissatisfaction. The most telling part is how rarely this is acknowledged openly. The city continues to promote itself aggressively, using the same images, the same slogans, the same promises. But beneath the surface, the experience has changed. And the people who feel it most clearly are the ones with no long-term stake in pretending otherwise. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If visitors are starting to feel unwelcome, what does that say about the city's relationship with those who are already exhausted inside it? Because the line between tourist and resident is thinner than it appears, and the same forces that drain one eventually reshape the other. There is a moment many visitors struggle to describe, but almost all of them feel it. It happens when you realize that parts of New York you expected to encounter simply no longer exist. not because they were destroyed by a disaster, but because they were quietly replaced. Neighborhoods that once had character now feel interchangeable. Streets that once carried local life now feel staged. The city has not emptied, but it has hollowed out. These are not the abandoned places people imagine when they hear about urban decline. They are occupied, expensive, and polished on the surface, but something essential is missing. Familiar shops disappear, community spaces vanish, long-standing businesses close without ceremony. In their place come chains, luxury storefronts, and short-term rentals designed for people passing through, not people staying. Visitors feel this as emotional dissonance. You walk through an area expecting texture and encounter uniformity. You search for authenticity and find branding. You sense that the city is performing itself rather than living. It feels less like entering a place and more like entering a system optimized for turnover. What makes this unsettling is how quickly these changes happen. A neighborhood you researched months ago no longer matches reality. Recommendations feel outdated. What existed yesterday is gone today, replaced by something more expensive and less meaningful. The city erases its own memory at a speed that disorients even those who try to keep up. This is where the idea of city ghosts becomes real, not empty streets, but erased identities. Communities pushed out not by force, but by cost. Artists replaced by investors. Families replaced by short-term occupants. The city remains full, yet strangely absent. You are surrounded by people, but connection feels thin. Visitors often sense this. Without having language for it, they say the city feels colder, less human, less welcoming. They assume it is personal or cultural or just bad timing. But what they are feeling is structural displacement made visible. The same forces that drive residents out reshape the environment visitors walk through. Gentrification is often framed as improvement, but improvement for whom matters. When a city upgrades itself to attract wealth, it often sacrifices the social fabric that made it desirable in the first place. The result is a place that looks successful but feels empty, expensive but fragile, prestigious but disconnected. This transformation also explains the strange tension between tourists and locals. Residents are not hostile by nature. They are fatigued. They live in a city that no longer feels designed for them, yet they are expected to perform friendliness for those passing through. Visitors pick up on this strain. The warmth feels forced. The patience feels thin. And so, the city becomes a place where everyone feels temporary. Tourists are temporary by design. Residents feel temporary by pressure. Even businesses feel temporary, always at risk of rent increases or replacement. Permanence disappears, and with it, trust. When a city loses permanence, it loses its ability to offer belonging. And without belonging, even the most iconic skyline starts to feel distant. You can admire it, photograph it, even enjoy moments within it, but you do not sink into it. You pass through. This is why so many people leave New York with a strange sense of loss, even if they cannot explain what they lost. They did not lose a place they knew. They lost the expectation that such a place still exists. And yet, despite all of this, the city continues to insist that everything is fine, that the system works, that the dream is alive, that nothing fundamental has changed, which leads directly to the most powerful force sustaining this illusion. What keeps this entire system intact is not denial in the traditional sense. It is something quieter and far more effective. Collective silence. New York does not need people to believe the myth anymore. It only needs them to stop questioning it out loud, and for the most part, that is exactly what happens. Admitting that the city no longer works feels risky. For residents, it can sound like failure. For professionals, it can feel like career sabotage. For institutions, it threatens funding, prestige, and identity. So the easiest response is normalization. High prices become just how it is. Stress becomes part of the energy. Decline becomes urban complexity. Language softens reality until the problem feels abstract instead of lived. Visitors sense this immediately when they try to talk about their experience. Complaints are deflected. Discomfort is reframed as personal weakness. If you felt overwhelmed, you were not prepared. If you felt overcharged, you did not research enough. If you felt disappointed, you expected too much. The system protects itself by shifting responsibility onto the individual. This is why so much dissatisfaction never turns into open critique. People internalize the experience rather than challenge it. They assume something is wrong with them, not the city. And that assumption is powerful. It prevents patterns from becoming conversations. Media plays a role here too. Coverage focuses on extremes, crime spikes, political battles, major projects. What it rarely examines is the slow erosion of daily livability, the small frictions that accumulate until life feels harder than it should. These stories are less dramatic, less clickable, and far more threatening to the brand. So the myth survives through omission, not by lying, but by not naming. The city is still sold as aspirational, even as fewer people can access it comfortably. The gap between image and experience widens, but remains unspoken. Tourism marketing amplifies this silence. Promotional material highlights moments, not processes. Skylines, shows, landmarks. Never waiting, never confusion, never exhaustion. The visitor arrives expecting the advertisement and encounters the system instead. And when the mismatch feels personal rather than structural, the illusion holds. Residents participate in this silence for understandable reasons. Many are invested emotionally, financially, or socially in the idea that New York is still the ultimate place to be. Questioning that idea threatens identity itself. It is easier to endure than to reassess. This creates a strange environment where almost everyone feels strain, but almost no one names it collectively. Conversations stay private. Complaints stay quiet. Decisions happen individually. People simply stop recommending the city, stop returning, stop dreaming about it. The withdrawal is subtle but cumulative, and this is the most dangerous phase of urban decline, not collapse but quiet disengagement. When belief erodes without confrontation, systems continue unchanged until the consequences are unavoidable. By the time the narrative shifts publicly, the damage is already embedded. Visitors are often the first to feel this because they have no reason to maintain the fiction. They arrive curious and leave confused. They cannot reconcile the cost, the stress, and the diminishing returns. And while they may not frame it as decline, their behavior reflects it. They do not come back. And when enough people make that decision independently, the story changes whether anyone admits it or not. The city begins sending a message it never intended to send. Not through announcements or policies, but through experience. Which brings us to the final realization. Because when a city known for attracting the world starts quietly repelling it, the issue is no longer tourism. It is the system itself. By the time visitors leave New York, most of them cannot point to a single moment that ruined the trip. There is no dramatic failure, no defining catastrophe. What they carry home instead is a conclusion formed quietly, almost subconsciously. The city demanded more than it gave, and that realization changes everything. This is the critical misunderstanding about urban collapse. People expect an event, a blackout, a riot, a financial crash. But what happens in cities like New York is far more subtle and far more damaging. The collapse unfolds as a process, one that reveals itself through experience rather than headlines. Through exhaustion rather than fear. Through disengagement rather than outrage. New York still functions. Trains still run, planes still land, restaurants still open, lights still glow, and that is precisely why the problem is harder to see. Functionality becomes the excuse. As long as nothing fully stops, decline is dismissed. But functioning is not the same as thriving, and it is not the same as welcoming. What the city communicates now, unintentionally but consistently, is that access is conditional. Comfort is optional. Belonging is expensive. Whether you are visiting for a week or living for a decade, the message is the same. Adapt or be drained. Pay more or be pushed aside. Accept friction or leave. This is why the 7 absurd charges you have just seen matter beyond tourism. They are signals. They reveal how a city treats people when its internal balance breaks, when systems are stretched, when maintenance replaces vision, when extraction replaces hospitality. Charges become substitutes for solutions. Visitors experience this compressed into days. Residents experience it stretched across years, but the emotional outcome is similar: fatigue, cynicism, detachment. People stop expecting the city to care, and when expectation disappears, loyalty follows. This is how a city loses its gravitational pull. Not through loss of fame, but through loss of trust. People stop believing that effort will be rewarded, that cost will be justified, that stress will lead somewhere meaningful. The dream does not shatter, it thins, until it is no longer strong enough to motivate return. And this is the real warning hidden inside New York's experience. If the city that once defined aspiration now feels hostile to the average visitor, then the issue is not tourism trends or personal taste. It is structural. It suggests a model of urban life that has reached its limits, because cities survive on circulation, of people, of energy, of belief. When circulation slows quietly, decline accelerates, invisibly. And by the time the narrative changes publicly, the lived reality has already moved on. New York is not alone in this. It is simply the clearest example. A mirror held up to modern urban life, reflecting what happens when growth continues without care and prestige continues without purpose. The charges you paid were never just about money. They were about tolerance, about how much strain a system assumes people will accept before walking away. And the most revealing answer is not spoken aloud. It is shown in behavior, in hesitation, in silence. In the growing number of people who look at New York, weigh the cost, feel the pressure, and decide something quietly but decisively. Not this time. If you stayed until this point, it means something here resonated with you, not as entertainment, but as recognition. This video is not about hating a city. It is about seeing clearly what modern urban life is becoming and why so many people feel drained, disappointed, or disillusioned without fully understanding why. If you have ever felt this tension, this fatigue, or this quiet sense that something about big cities no longer adds up, leave a comment writing, "The illusion is breaking." That single phrase helps signal to others that they are not alone in noticing these patterns. If this analysis helped you connect the dots instead of just reacting emotionally, leave a like. It tells the platform that thoughtful, critical conversations about urban reality still matter. And if you want more videos that question the myths of modern cities, expose the hidden costs of urban life, and analyze what statistics never show, subscribe to the channel. New videos here are not about trends or headlines. They are about understanding where we are headed. Before you go, watch the next video appearing on your screen now. It continues this conversation by exposing another side of urban decline that most people sense, but almost nobody explains clearly.